I wanted to talk a little bit about the topic of online anonymity and of anonymity in general. It's been kind of brought to our attention recently due to certain kind of political tensions over whether or not online anonymity facilitates some sort of anti-democratic or anti-civilized tendencies, and it unleashes these and gives cover for these and so forth. Of particular significance is Jordan Peterson's relatively recent attacks on anonymity, calling online anons evil troll demons and so on. So it's not just the left who's kind of threatened by this kind of anosphere, who is probably for the most part younger men. I would say they're sort of right leaning, but they're not. It's not a kind of obvious sort of right leaning tendency. It's not a neoconservative one. It's not a kind of traditionally conservative one. It perhaps is a little bit Nietzschean at times, especially when a lot of the anonymous identifications are, things like Bronze Age pervert, for example, has kind of got this kind of identification with antiquity, with a kind of sort of figures of kind of classical masculinity, we could say, and also there's a lot of anonymity which is kind of playful and comical. People will put up funny characters from peculiar television shows and movies. They're not necessarily identifications which are supposed to aggrandize them with some sort of great egoistic feeling of superiority or something. Like not all of these anonymous identifications are with Napoleon or some great figure, but often, like the one I've used, some peculiar and niche kind of stupid character. So there's also an element of we could say kind of a humor and irony to this general sphere of troll demons. And it's often people often defend anonymity by saying something like, well, look, we need to have anonymity so we can actually make use of our free speech, because if our name is attached to something, it's kind of on the record, and we get punished by saying this, not by the state necessarily, but we get punished by social groups. We get excluded, we get labeled this and that, or we face a kind of reputational punish and a scapegoating, or we face punishment from employers. And this is true. I'm not saying this isn't a part of the value of anonymity, but I think there's also a kind of deeper value of anonymity, which often gets overlooked. And that isn't just a practical, kind of a way of using your free speech without facing kind of punitive repercussions from employers or social circles. But also that it provides, I would say, a kind of psychological, modality or style, which seems to be conducive to creativity and intellect, maybe even a kind of genius, I'd say a creativity and a kind of spirit, which for some reason seems to be lacking often when we simply use our real names or have people refer to us as us. I think what's important here is that there's a clear need beyond the practical securities of employment and social relationships or whatever. There's a clear need to be something else other than what we are in our sort of day-to-day lives. the identity that we've assumed from being just normal everyday people in the modern world, working a normal job, having a normal family life, normal friends, and so on. The environment we exist in is so kind of, I would say, hyper moralistic and hyper sclerotic and hyper stupefied, and I would say very emotionally undisciplined. In So it's not able to really manage or even coexist increasingly with like the most basic refutations and challenges to what we could call kind of like progressive and liberal dogmas. And I don't mean liberal just in a progressive sense, but even in a conservative sense of liberalism, I think a kind of classical liberalism too. There's equally there, I think, the incapability of really having ideas around individualism, for example, thoroughly challenged. There's a lack of emotional discipline and a lack of imagination, which in which even the presence of anything beyond that horizon, beyond, we can kind of say that Fukuyama end of history horizon, creates vicious social reactions. I'd say hysterical, actually, like proper hysteria, in both genders to an extent, and there's a sort of need for a space where we can not be us, in the sense that we're not constantly morally accountable as an individual for kind of having obvious thoughts that any decent, reasonable people should probably have at this stage. And I think we often forget that our thinking is transformative, like especially when it's political in some sense. It doesn't have to be political in an obvious sense, but it can just be in some sense of imagining a new way of being, a new way of living, or maybe an old way of living, an old way of being, or at least a different horizon to the horizon we've been given. There's a transformative component to the way we think about the world, right? We're kind of the modern kind of progressive scientific way of thinking is always thinking about how do we, economistically, technologically, socially change the world, and this will make us more civilized, or this will make us better people somehow. But what we often leave out of that is this kind of morphological and transformational component to ourselves as what we are, as our identifications with ourselves as modern people, as humans, as whatever. That it's not so easy to simply say, well, let's change the conditions and this will change us. We often need to sort of imagine and intensely identify with something really, really different to us, really other to us. And I'll use the example here of Fight Club, because this is exactly what happens in Fight Club, right? You have this end of history man. This kind of works a normal, boring job. He's kind of depressed. He's kind of meaningless. He's just a kind of man reduced to a consumer and so forth. And he develops this intense identification with something really other to him, and it's even shown. This otherness is shown even in the way they dress, right? If you look at the various scenes from Fight Club, the way Edward Norton dresses compared to the way Brad Pitt dresses, it's everything is just hugely distinct. And the value of that is that there's an identification with something, beyond what you are and beyond what you do in your day-to-day life, and your sort of subservience to the unfortunate historical predicament that you happen to be in, as being this kind of end of history person with no real purpose and kind of stuck in this circus of consumption and office work and whatever. So there's a need for an intense and transformative identification, which is obvious with anonymity. So anonymity doesn't just express a way for us to speak without being punished, but it also expresses quite literally a a way of being which is which can't even be integrated or imagined within the larger social order that you're in. It can't even be tolerated minimally. It can't even be imagined. It's completely alien, right? And I suppose anonymity could be seen as a way of stimulating and exercising that identification with the other, not just the stupid multicultural progressive other of flat, boring, grey equality, but deeply distinct and higher otherness, right? Something which obviously we've lost in secular societies because we don't identify anymore with saints or with gods or with heroes or with or even historical figures. We don't even identify with anymore. We have this completely flat identification, which is okay maybe if everything's working okay in society, but as soon as it doesn't and we want something more, we want to reach a new horizon, suddenly that doesn't work anymore, and we need something truly distinct and truly more than what we are. Now the other claim that Jordan Peterson makes, which I want to challenge here, is that anonymity gives people, the social media in general and anonymity gives people the ability to gives cover for kind of pathological behaviors. So he'll talk about this kind of dark triad of Machiavellianism and whatever. I don't know the other two, but by reaching a large audience and by speaking anonymously, it escapes any sort of accountability or social conditioning, which elevates and exaggerates pathological behaviors. Now, this is true. Like, this is largely true. Like, social media, the capacity to speak to so many people at once, does lead to a sort of exaggeration of certain tendencies, which are would normally be kind of repressed, we could say, or conditioned and contained in normal, in real life, IRL life, right? So, but the thing is, like, the internet just does this with everything, right? So you have a kind of really superficial society, one that desires to be, just kind of stupefied and titillated and distracted and comforted, and it wants you people to approve of your trivial life. Look at me, I made spaghetti carbonara, I went on a walk with my dog. It gives the trivial and the mediocre and the insignificance huge platform, and it does this because people agree to give, like, if you agree to like your friend or your family member's stupid, Instagram post about their stupid meal that they ate or their stupid holiday that no one really gives a shit about, they will agree to do the same to you. So there's this kind of contractual, mutual self-deception which social media facilitates, and that's absolutely nothing exclusive to anonymity there. In fact, it's worse with people who use their real names, because if someone uses an anonymous name and they actually write like really good essays, or they make these good tweets or good YouTube videos that are actually intellectually stimulating and provocative, they don't really get credit for that, right? I mean, like, they themselves don't get credit for that. That, like, Bronze Age pervert gets credit for that, or whoever's the anonymous figure, and they don't walk around their day-to-day life getting a pat on the back from friends and family. They sort of have this fan base on the internet, but it's really a kind of kind of subterranean life. I think a lot of us who use the internet to for, let's say, higher cultural tasks of intellectual, stimulation and writing and video production and all this stuff. Me personally, I generally don't tell most of my, let's say, in real life relationships about this, because people have brain worms, and I just don't think I actually don't think they're ready for it. Like, I don't think they have the emotional discipline for it. I don't think they have the intellectual capacity for it. Anonymity is actually quite hierarchical. It's a kind of intrusion of hierarchy into a world in which everyone is entitled to an equal opinion, and everyone's, like the absolute vomit and diarrhea which most people vomit onto their social media accounts day to day. We all do this with this entitlement that they're entitled to be, to be given a platform. They're entitled to be given, attention and so forth. Where it's actually the anons who are more likely to actually deserve the attention, and they're actually doing it without really themselves getting the recognition for it, because it's their other identity getting the recognition for it. It's not actually, me, myself, right? So actually it subverts some of the really vulgar elements to the kind of which social media has caused in modern society. The inflation of triviality, the entitlement to attention, the constant communication of mediocrity and nothingness. There's something almost kind of a little bit egalitarian, actually, about Jordan Peterson's attack on anonymity. He's was almost threatened by the fact that a kind of actual meritocracy or an actual hierarchy might spontaneously form from inside this cesspool of triviality, which is 99% of the internet. And so the last point I wanted to make about this was that I also think that it's very cheap and short-sighted and short-memoried of him to think that anonymity gives people room to, it gives them cover for their vices. It gives them cover for their sins. It gives them cover for their pathologies, however we want to phrase this. Okay, let's go back to the origins of capitalism, right? Let's go back to the origins of capitalism, which he's constantly espousing the good of. Acquisition, greed, avarice, self-indulgence, these were sins. These were sins in medieval Europe. These were sins in classical times, in antiquity. It was capitalism which had to sort of convert these sins into things which were benefits, into virtues. And you can think here of Mandeville, the kind of very free market, the free market advocate, kind of a very liberal free market advocate figure, Mandeville, who said, private vices are public benefits. So your private vices, your desire for acquisition, greed, your kind of selfish desires within a market system can be mutually beneficial, because it means that you're going to trade with people and so forth, and people get what they want. It's a very vulgar utilitarian view of the good, but it's still an argument of the good, and it's still an argument of the good which came about through giving cover for private vices, giving cover for them. And if you read, for example, Albert Hirschman's The Passions and the Interests, you'll see that this didn't just happen economically, that there was a sort of political desire, a kind of liberal political desire, to not have people impassioned by their life, by their thinking, by their acts, that to be self-interested in this kind of capitalistic way, was actually made people more predictable and controllable in some sense. So it helped stop social conflict. And in that sense, you know, it was the same argument. Like people's sort of vulgar, trivial, kind of selfish nature was good actually, because it stopped interesting things happening, right? So, and interesting things can be disruptive and bad, you know. So again, it's the same thing. It's basically an ideological and a technological way of giving vices and pathologies cover and exaggerating them. And that's the whole history of capitalism. So, you know, we're living in the middle of non-stop vices and pathologies just being promoted and indulged 24/7 non-stop. And anyone, including Jordan Peterson, who tries to regulate any of this is brutally punished, you know. So, yeah, I think that if we want to really understand the benefit of anonymity in this regard, we have to think a lot more deeper than the current shallow level of thought which is being handed to us.